The entire cafe went quiet when Adrian Cole said the name Grace Holloway. A spoon stopped halfway to an old man's mouth. The pharmacist at the counter lowered the paper bag she had been sealing. Even the waitress, who had been explaining which road led to the Cole estate, forgot the rest of her sentence. For Adrian stood beside the pastry case, with 4-year-old Sophie holding 2 fingers of his left hand and a stuffed gray elephant pressed beneath her chin. He had asked a simple question, whether anyone knew Grace Holloway well enough to provide a local reference for a temporary childcare position. The answer came from a retired teacher near the window. "You can hire anyone in this county," Mrs. Doyle said. "Do not leave your little girl with her." Sophie moved closer to Adrian's leg. He felt the room watching her. "Why?" he asked. The pharmacist, Nina Patel, spoke carefully. "A child died while Grace was responsible for a daycare room. She says the story is complicated. People here remember a locked door, a fire, and one family that never got their daughter back." Another customer added that no respectable family had employed Grace since. Mrs. Doyle said there was a reason she lived alone at the edge of town. The warning sounded less like gossip than settled history, repeated so often that nobody needed to explain where one fact ended and another began. Adrian had moved temporarily to Bellwether after purchasing his late grandfather's estate and beginning a major restructuring of his company from a quieter location. He needed help with Sophie, who had rejected 4 professional nannies since her mother's death. She hid beneath furniture when strangers approached, pulled away from hands that moved too quickly, and rarely spoke outside familiar rooms. Grace was scheduled to interview at 3. Adrian looked around the cafe and said, "Was she convicted?" Nobody answered immediately. Nina finally said, "No." But not everything wrong becomes a conviction. Adrian did not dismiss the warning. He also did not accept it as proof. When he stepped outside, a dark blue car was turning onto the estate road. Grace Holloway was driving, while 2 cafe customers stood at the window, watching her go. Grace arrived 10 minutes early and waited on the porch until Adrian opened the door. She was 40, perhaps a little older, with dark hair tied at the nape of her neck and a pale scar crossing the back of one hand. She carried no gifts, toys, candy, or stack of qualifications designed to impress him. Her reference folder contained 3 short-term jobs: caring for an elderly woman after surgery, bookkeeping at a plant nursery, and supervising children during a seasonal farm program in another county. Each reference was genuine. None lasted more than a year. A background check showed no conviction involving a child and no charge for intentional harm. The official report from the Bellwether daycare fire listed staff failure to maintain room accountability, but also contained missing attachments and a page renumbered by hand. Adrian disliked unanswered questions. He disliked uncertainty around Sophie more. "People in town believe I should not hire you," he said. Grace nodded as though he had mentioned the weather. "They believe a child died because I failed her." "Did she?" Grace looked toward the hallway where Sophie was hiding behind a low cabinet, visible only by one red shoe. "A child died. I was responsible for watching the room." That is the part everyone remembers, and the part they forget. Not appropriate for an interview with your daughter nearby. She did not ask for sympathy or insist on innocence. Adrian asked how she would approach Sophie. Grace said, "I would not approach her." Then she sat on the carpet near the window, leaving more than 6 feet between herself and the cabinet. She placed her hands openly on her knees and looked at the garden instead of searching for Sophie's face. Previous candidates had crouched, waved, promised sweets, asked for hugs, or used bright baby voices. Grace did nothing. After several minutes, she noticed that the stuffed elephant's side seam was open and a thread trailed across the carpet. "That elephant may lose some stuffing," she said, still looking toward the window. "I have a needle in my bag. I can fix it if the owner wants. I will not touch it unless she brings it to me." Silence followed. Adrian expected Sophie to retreat farther. Instead, she crawled from behind the cabinet, crossed the rug slowly, and placed the elephant in Grace's lap. Grace did not smile broadly or praise her courage. She touched the loose thread and asked, "May I hold him?" Sophie nodded. "I'll keep him safe until you want him back," Grace said. Sophie sat beside her. The moment was not magic. Sophie did not start talking freely or climb into Grace's arms. She simply remained close, while Grace repaired the seam with small, even stitches. Yet Adrian understood what he was seeing. Since Caroline's death, Sophie had not willingly approached any unfamiliar adult. She trusted doctors only after several visits. She tolerated her tutor because lessons happened across a table. Grace had done one thing differently. She allowed Sophie to control the distance. Adrian offered a 3-day trial with clear rules. Grace would never take Sophie off the estate without written permission. Medication, visitors, and schedule changes required approval. Doors were not to be locked from the outside. Grace paused at that final rule. "I would never do that," she said. She also asked for every smoke alarm location, 2 emergency exits from each main room, and access to a first aid kit. Adrian wrote the requests down as evidence of caution, though part of him wondered whether they were evidence of obsession. The first afternoon, Grace gave Sophie 2 choices at a time: blue cup or green cup, garden or library, crackers or apple. When Sophie refused both, Grace accepted the refusal. Before entering the playroom, she knocked. Before moving a pile of blocks from the doorway, she asked. When Sophie fell asleep beneath the reading table, Grace did not lift her. She placed a blanket nearby and waited until the child woke. At dinner, Sophie ate more than she had in weeks because Grace did not count bites. That night, when a dream made Sophie cry, Grace sat outside the bedroom and said, "I am in the hallway. I will come in, only if you ask." Sophie opened the door herself. Trust grew through routines too small for Adrian's reports. Grace told Sophie where she was going before leaving a room. She taught her to count people at the garden gate. 1 Sophie, 1 Grace, 1 Mr. Ellis trimming roses. They baked bread, and Grace allowed Sophie to press 1 finger into the dough before it rose. They planted marigolds near the kitchen window, because Grace said flowers should be visible from places where people worked. Not only from drawing rooms, Sophie still hid when delivery drivers arrived, and refused Grace's hand near the road, but she began asking, "Grace, come back," whenever the woman went home. She spoke around household staff again. Her nightmares did not disappear, yet she recovered more quickly because no one entered her room without warning. Grace encouraged Adrian to take over the bedtime story twice during the trial. "She does not need someone to replace you," Grace said when he thanked her. "She needs you to become predictable." The statement irritated him because he had spent 2 years creating schedules, medical plans, and the safest environment money could buy. Grace meant emotional predictability. Adrian traveled, returned late, and often answered business calls while Sophie was speaking. He had managed grief through professionals because professionals gave him measurable tasks. Grace saw the gap without accusing him of causing Caroline's death or Sophie's fear. By the end of the trial, Adrian extended the arrangement for 1 month. Bellwether did not approve. An unsigned note appeared beneath the estate gate. "Ask about Emily Vale." A newspaper clipping arrived in the mail showing the blackened front of Little Steps daycare and a photograph of Grace being led away with bandages around both arms. The headline read, "Caregiver questioned after Shield dies in locked room." Nina, the pharmacist, called Adrian directly. She said she did not enjoy repeating tragedy, but she had known Emily's mother. "Grace may be gentle now," Nina said. "Guilt can make people careful." Mrs. Doyle approached him outside the post office and said his wealth would not protect Sophie from a bad judgment. "Not everyone" sounded malicious. Some genuinely believed they were preventing a second death. Others repeated phrases without knowing their source. Grace told Adrian he could dismiss her if the pressure threatened Sophie's peace. "I will not ask you to gamble with your child to repair my reputation," she said. Adrian asked why she counted exits whenever they entered a building. "Because once I knew only one." "Why did she check locks twice?" "Because a door that looks open can still be secured from the other side." "Why did alarms make her hands shake?" "Because memory arrives before reason." Her answers were honest and incomplete. Adrian continued the arrangement, but he increased observation. He returned unexpectedly one afternoon and found Grace and Sophie in the greenhouse counting seedlings. Another morning, he checked the kitchen doors after Grace left and discovered both unlocked from the inside, exactly as required. Direct experience argued against the town. Fear kept searching for the detail experience had missed. The suspicious detail arrived as a missing gold locket. It had belonged to Caroline and contained a photograph of Sophie as a newborn. Adrian kept it in a velvet box inside his bedroom desk. He sometimes showed it to Sophie when she asked about her mother, but she was never allowed to carry it through the house because the clasp was fragile. On a rainy Thursday, the locket vanished. Adrian checked the desk twice, then called the estate manager, Martin Ellis. They searched the bedroom, Sophie's playroom, the library, and the laundry. Grace helped quietly, asking when Adrian had last seen it, and whether anyone had cleaned the study. Sophie sat on the staircase, holding her elephant, and would not answer questions. Martin found the locket 2 hours later inside the inner pocket of Grace's coat, hanging in the staff entrance. The chain was tangled around a packet of tissues. Nobody had needed to open her handbag or enter a private room. The object was exactly where a careless thief might believe it would remain unnoticed until she left. Martin carried the coat into the library with the locket displayed across his palm. Adrian looked at Grace. Her face did not collapse into panic. It became very still. "I did not put it there," she said. Martin replied, "No one else wears this coat." Adrian remembered the newspaper clipping, the missing attachments, and every warning that he had treated as fear disguised as certainty. Betrayal came faster because he had defended his decision. "Did you enter my room?" he asked. "No. Did you touch the locket?" "Not before this moment." "Then how did it enter your pocket?" "I do not know." Martin said the outside gate camera showed no visitors. Staff had been in assigned areas. Grace was the only person moving between the library and upper hall during Sophie's rest time. Grace looked at Adrian and said, "If you believe I stole it, dismiss me. But please do not question your daughter, as though she did something wrong." The request sounded strange enough to deepen his suspicion. Why would Sophie have anything to do with this? Grace glanced toward the stairs. "Because she has been quiet since you said it was missing." Adrian called Sophie into the library. The child came only after Grace moved away from the doorway. Adrian knelt and showed her the locket. "Did you see this today?" Sophie looked at Grace, then at the floor. "Sweetheart, I am not angry. I need the truth." Her shoulders rose. "Do not ask her like she is being examined," Grace said. Adrian's fear sharpened into anger. "You do not control this conversation." Grace accepted the rebuke. "No, but she is frightened." Adrian asked Martin to take Grace to the staff sitting room while he spoke with Sophie alone. Grace went without resistance. Sophie watched her leave and began to cry. Grace go? Maybe. No. The locket was in her coat. Sophie pressed both hands over her ears. Adrian lowered his voice. "Did you put it there?" No answer. "Did Grace tell you to?" Sophie shook her head violently. "Did she take it?" "No." "Then how?" Sophie ran to the coat hook, reached into another pocket, and pulled out a folded drawing of Caroline holding the elephant. "Mommy goes Grace," she said. Adrian waited. Sophie struggled to arrange the thought. "Mommy stays with people who come back. Grace goes home. Mommy makes Grace come back." She had placed the locket in Grace's coat because she believed carrying something that belonged to her mother would make Grace return the next morning. In her 4-year-old logic, the locket was not property. It was a promise. Adrian sat on the floor. Relief arrived first, followed by shame so direct it left no room for self-defense. He had watched Grace care for Sophie with restraint, patience, and respect. One suspicious object had been enough to turn every rumor into proof. He had expected Grace to establish innocence before he questioned the accusation. He brought her back to the library and explained. Grace listened without looking at the locket. Sophie approached and held out the elephant. Grace crouched, but did not take it. "You cannot put precious things in people's pockets without asking," she said gently. "It can make others think they took them." Sophie nodded, crying. Grace asked permission before wiping one tear with a tissue. Then she stood. Adrian apologized in front of Martin. "I allowed the town's story to outweigh what I had seen. I treated suspicion as proof because I was afraid of feeling foolish for trusting you. That was unfair." Grace picked up her coat. "You did what everyone else did. You found the explanation that required the least courage. Will you return tomorrow?" "I have not decided." She left without accepting the apology as payment. Sophie stood at the window until Grace's car disappeared. That evening, Adrian held the locket while Sophie repeated, "Grace comes back?" He could not promise for her. Grace returned 2 days later, not because Adrian increased the salary or because the town changed its mind. She said she would complete the month she had agreed to, then decide whether the position remained healthy for Sophie and herself. Her professionalism made Adrian feel the boundary he had damaged. He did not ask her to forgive him. Instead, he began investigating the old fire. He did not tell Grace he intended to clear her name. When she learned, she warned him not to turn her tragedy into a project with his name above it. "I am not asking for a campaign," she said. "I am asking what actually happened." "Then ask quietly," she replied. "Emily's family has already survived enough people using her death." Adrian hired an independent records researcher and a fire safety attorney from outside the county. The original fire department report showed that Little Steps operated an evening program with one employee supervising 19 children, though state rules required 3 adults. Grace had been the junior employee left alone, after the owner reassigned 2 workers to a fundraising event. She evacuated 18 children through a side door after smoke filled the main hallway. Emily, age 6, remained inside an unlisted storage room. The owner claimed Grace had placed her there for misbehavior and forgotten her. Grace denied locking the door. The official report described the lock as damaged by heat, but archived photographs showed a slide bolt mounted outside the room, intact after the fire. A retired firefighter named Thomas Hale agreed to meet Adrian at the station museum. He remembered Grace trying to re-enter the building 3 times. Firefighters restrained her after her sleeves caught fire near the hallway. Medical records confirmed second-degree burns along both forearms and smoke inhalation severe enough to require 2 nights in hospital. "She kept shouting that the small room was locked," Hale said. "The owner told us there was no child assigned there. We searched it late because it was listed as storage, not occupancy." Hale had written the external bolt into his field notes, but that paragraph disappeared from the final report. He assumed investigators handled it. Years later, he saw a newspaper story stating Grace had accidentally trapped Emily and believed perhaps he had misunderstood. "Why speak now?" Adrian asked. Hale looked at an old helmet behind glass. "Because silence feels different when someone asks the exact question." The second witness was Lena Morris, a former daycare assistant who had moved away after the fire. She provided copies of staff complaints, saved in an old email account. Employees had reported chronic understaffing, blocked exits, and the owner's use of the storage room as an unofficial quiet space for children who disrupted nap time. The bolt was installed to keep children from opening the door. Grace had complained twice to management. She had not contacted regulators. Lena said the owner threatened reduced hours if staff created trouble before a licensing renewal. On the night of the fire, Grace did not know Emily had been placed in the storage room by the owner's adult son, Fa, who left for the fundraiser without updating the attendance board. Insurance correspondence revealed pressure to describe the tragedy as individual staff negligence. A management violation could void parts of the policy and reduce compensation available to injured children. Grace signed a restrictive settlement after being told that challenging the account could delay payments for families. The settlement did not admit criminal responsibility, but the owner's attorney released a statement saying she had accepted accountability. The town turned legal ambiguity into moral certainty. Adrian showed Grace the documents at the kitchen table after Sophie went to bed. Grace read Lena's complaint emails without surprise. "I wrote one of these with her," she said. "Why did you not go outside the daycare?" "I needed the job. My mother was ill. I believed that if I watched carefully enough, I could compensate for bad staffing and a bad lock." She touched the scar on her hand. "They lied about what I did that night. But I still live with what I failed to do before it." Adrian said management created the conditions. "Yes, and I saw conditions that could hurt a child. I complained to people who benefited from ignoring me, then returned the next day." Innocence is not always clean. Her refusal to erase her regret made the evidence more believable, not less. She did not want admiration. She wanted the official record to state that Emily died inside an illegally locked room during an understaffed shift, and that the woman blamed for abandoning her had evacuated 18 children and tried to return. "Her family deserves that truth," Grace said, "even if they never forgive me for not reporting the lock sooner." The former daycare owner, Margaret Bell, remained respected in town as a donor to the library and organizer of an annual child safety fundraiser when an independent review was scheduled before the county child care board. Margaret asked Adrian to meet privately. She said reopening the case would wound Emily's parents and damage programs funded by the settlement. "The town needed closure," she said. "Parents needed one clear answer. Grace was responsible for the room." Adrian placed the staff schedule and fire photographs on the table. The room was not listed on her attendance sheet. Margaret said legal advisors made decisions under impossible pressure, revealing every safety failure would have destroyed the daycare, invalidated insurance, and left families without compensation. "Nothing can bring Emily back." "No," Adrian said, but blaming the person no one would defend did not bring her back either. Margaret's face hardened. People needed someone to blame, and she was the person no one would defend. Adrian replied, "That does not make the story true. It only explains why the lie survived." At the county hearing, Adrian submitted records but did not lead the testimony. Hale described the rescue attempts and external bolt. Lena confirmed understaffing and prior complaints. Grace spoke last. She said Emily's name, described the yellow shoes the child wore that evening, and admitted she should have reported the lock beyond management. She asked for no award, job restoration, or public apology. She asked that the official local record be amended to include the illegal room, falsified staffing, altered inspection notes, and her documented rescue efforts. Emily's mother sat in the second row. She did not approach Grace afterward, but she remained until the board voted unanimously to reopen the safety findings. The correction did not make the town instantly kind. Mrs. Doyle apologized. Nina said she needed time to reconsider what she believed. Others insisted the new evidence changed details but not responsibility. Truth entered slowly because rumor had occupied the space for years. The board's revised finding was not an acquittal issued by applause. It was a corrected account. Grace had been left alone in violation of staffing rules. The storage room had been illegally secured from outside. Management had concealed prior complaints, and her rescue attempts had been minimized. Local newspapers printed the correction beneath photographs that looked painfully similar to the ones that had condemned her. Some readers apologized. Others wrote that paperwork could not change what they had felt for years. Grace refused interviews. She visited Emily's grave once, alone, carrying 6 yellow tulips, and left before the family arrived. Adrian did not follow her. He apologized again for the locket accusation, this time without asking whether she accepted it. "I made you stand in front of me as a suspect because fear made the rumor convenient," he said. "I should have started with what I knew of your conduct, then investigated what I did not know." Grace replied, "Trust is not refusing to question people. It is questioning them fairly." She agreed to remain through the season under a written arrangement that preserved her independence and gave her authority to refuse unsafe instructions. Adrian accepted every condition. Sophie's progress stayed uneven. She still hid beneath the library table when strangers arrived. A smoke alarm test sent her running into the garden, where Grace waited several feet away until Sophie asked for her hand. Another night, Sophie woke calling for Caroline and refused both adults. Adrian sat outside the door for almost an hour, copying the patience Grace had shown. Eventually, Sophie opened it and climbed into his lap. Grace watched from the stairs, then quietly returned to her room. Adrian understood that becoming present did not mean becoming the only person Sophie needed. It meant remaining available, without turning her grief into a schedule, someone else managed with care, honesty, and patience. Several weeks later, Grace remained at the estate because she chose to stay. Adrian had begun arranging his schedule around Sophie, rather than arranging Sophie around work. One Saturday morning, he prepared to take her to the town garden without Grace. Sophie stood in the hall wearing yellow boots and asked, "Grace coming?" Grace knelt near the coat rack. "Not today. Today is for you and your dad." Sophie considered this, then took Adrian's hand willingly. Before leaving, she placed the stuffed elephant in Grace's lap. Grace asked, "Should I keep it safe?" Sophie shook her head. "No, it keeps you safe." Grace held the elephant carefully. Adrian understood then that his daughter's trust had never proved Grace was perfect. It proved she felt respected in Grace's presence. This time he did not mistake the difference.